A cabinet meeting outside the capital. Underscoring his drive for balanced regional growth, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung convened his weekly cabinet meeting in Sejong City, his first outside Seoul since taking office. We have the wrap-up. Tariff tensions are on the rise. With U.S. auto tariffs on Japan set to fall to 15% starting Tuesday, the big question now, when will South Korea's matching cut take effect? We break down where Seoul's trade talks with Washington stand. And global stock markets, including South Korea's Kospi, have hit fresh highs as investors bet the U.S. Federal Reserve will slash interest rates this week. Good evening, and thank you for joining us on this Tuesday evening. I'm Song Yujin, filling in for Kim Da-mi. Tonight, we begin with President Lee Jae-myung's cabinet meeting held outside Seoul for the first time under his administration. There, the president called balanced regional growth inevitable for sustainable development. The cabinet also confirmed the administration's comprehensive policy roadmap. Our presidential office correspondent Yoon Jung-min starts us off.
Achieving sustainable growth is a key task for the nation, and it is possible through balanced growth. This is according to President Lee Jae-myung as he presided over the weekly cabinet meeting on Tuesday at the Sejong government complex in the administrative city of Sejong for the first time since taking office.
대한민국의 지속적인 성장 발전을 위해서 이제는 국가 균형 발전이 선택이 아니라 이제 운명이 됐다 이렇게 생각이 듭니다.
To shift away from a system heavily concentrated in the capital, the new government is pushing a key national agenda to balance development across other regions, divided into 5 key hubs, including the Seoul metropolitan area and 3 special governing areas, Gangwon, Jeonbuk, and Jeju.
Currently, we have a balanced growth system that treats regions equally, but it will be converted into concentration and connection, focusing on intensive regional units.
In line with that, the president renewed his pledge to build another presidential office in Sejong, as well as a National Assembly building. And noting Youth Week, President Lee stated the need to boost employment among young people, pointing to the August job report that showed the employment rate of people aged 15 to 29 declining for the 16th straight months.
청년 고용 문제 해결을 위해서는 정부뿐 아니라 기업의 노력도 필요합니다. 청년도 기업도 국가도 모두가 윈윈하는.
During Tuesday's meeting, the Lee administration's 123 policy tasks unveiled last month were confirmed by the cabinet, which will serve as a roadmap for the next 5 years. Among a wide range of areas, key agenda items include introducing 2 4-year presidential terms instead of the current single 5-year term. South Korea also aims to bolster its 3-axis defense system, as well as take back wartime operational control from Washington. On the economy, the authorities will focus on fostering new growth engines involving AI and biotechnology. The government made sure these are carried out in the right direction through a monitoring system, while creating an online platform where ordinary people can pitch their ideas. After the cabinet meeting, Lee stopped by a farm in Sejong to meet and greet young farmers and discussed ways to promote smart farming. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Now, our other top story tonight is on the Trump administration's trade war. Starting Tuesday, Japan will face a 15% auto tariff. This move is raising eyebrows here in South Korea, where talks with Washington to secure the same rate are still underway. With concerns that the country may lose its competitive edge in the industry, Kim Do-yeon has the latest on the negotiations.
A notice on the U.S. Federal Register has made it official. As of Tuesday U.S. time, the tariff on Japanese-made cars and auto parts will fall to 15%. That's a sharp drop from the 27.5% rate Japanese automakers had been paying, which included a 25% tariff under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. The decision immediately reshapes the competitive landscape in the U.S., one of the world's biggest auto markets. With negotiations on a $350 billion investment package ongoing, South Korean auto exports, the #1 export to the U.S., will continue to face a 25% tariff. It leaves South Korean automakers, who are also subject to Section 232 tariffs, at a significant disadvantage, with South Korean and Japanese cars also competing in the same price groups. South Korea's Trade Minister Yo Han-gu is currently in Washington to finalize those talks. Negotiations have reportedly stalled over the terms of the investment deal. Minister Yo says he is focused on getting the lower rate applied as quickly as possible, but not at the expense of South Korea's national interest.
We are working to have the 15% rate applied as quickly as possible. This is a negotiation process, so rather than being swayed by every term, we are focused on achieving a final result that we can accept.
Meanwhile, Yo also touched on the recent detention of Korean workers by U.S. immigration authorities at a Hyundai plant in Georgia.
It seems the U.S. side also feels its action was a bit excessive, and we will do our best to ensure the interests of our company are reflected.
The trade minister is expected to stay in Washington for 3 days as he works to finalize a deal on the critical tariff issue. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, meanwhile, with just days left until the U.S. Federal Reserve decides on the country's base interest rate, some major global stock markets, including South Korea's, have reached all-time highs. Park Jun-an has the details and what's ahead for this rally.
On Monday and Tuesday, stock markets in South Korea, the U.S., and Japan broke their all-time record highs just days before the U.S. Federal Reserve's interest rate decision. South Korea's benchmark Kospi climbed to 3,450 points during Tuesday's session, marking its 11th consecutive day of gains and setting a new all-time high for the 5th trading day in a row. In the U.S. on Monday, both the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq set new intraday and closing record highs. The S&P 500 index rose around 0.5% to break 6,615 points at the end of the session. On the same day, the Nasdaq 100 Composite Index surged around 1% to just below 22,350 points at the market's close. Strong performances in the technology and communication services sectors backed the market's rally. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 index broke the 45,000 barrier for the first time on Tuesday, reaching 45,055 points shortly after the market opened. The stock hike was attributed to positive outcomes from U.S. market gains ahead of the anticipated Fed rate cut and progress in U.S.-China trade negotiations. According to the CME Fed Watch tool, which tracks federal funds futures to assess market expectations for Federal Reserve policy shifts, there is a 95% chance of a 25 basis points rate cut at the upcoming FOMC meeting. The tool also indicated a 5% probability of a larger 50 basis points cut. Although a rate cut is widely anticipated, an economics professor noted that stock prices are already high even if the Fed decides to cut the rates.
With expectations of more liquidity and an economic rebound, markets are pricing in a rate cut. Stocks rose, but having already climbed, they could drop after the announcement.
As global markets continue to rally, the Reserve's next move and its narrative could either solidify these gains or bring new uncertainties to the markets. Park Jun-an, Arirang News.
Staying on the economic front, the price of gold has seen its steepest surge since 1979, driven by economic uncertainty and inflation fears linked to the Trump administration's tariff policies. That's according to the Wall Street Journal on Monday, which said gold hasn't rallied this much since the 1970s, when inflation soared worldwide following the Middle East oil shock. The price of gold jumped almost 40% this year, outpacing gains seen during the COVID-19 market crash, as well as the 2007 to 2009 financial crisis. The Wall Street Journal also said both small and large investors are flocking to gold as a hedge against growing uncertainty over the U.S. economic outlook and its role in the global economy. The National Assembly opened its first interpellation session under the Lee Jae-myung administration on Monday. This 4-day questioning period is expected to spark heated exchanges between the rival parties, covering a wide range of state issues. For our politics and diplomacy this week, our Moon Hae-ryun joins me in the studio to tell us more. Welcome, Hae-ryun.
Good evening, Yujin.
Thank you for joining us. So, Hae-ryun, starting off, tell us about this interpellation session and what went down yesterday.
Right, so for those who are unfamiliar, an interpellation session is a formal process in which members of the National Assembly question top government officials, from the Prime Minister to cabinet members and officials, on their policies and performance. This 4-day session started off yesterday, as you just mentioned, and will carry on to Thursday, addressing a range of different issues. So on Monday, lawmakers clashed over political affairs. A debate quickly centered on judicial reforms and calls for Chief Justice Cho Hee-dae to step down, with the Democratic Party accusing him of political bias. This accusation stems from a controversial Supreme Court ruling that found President Lee guilty of making false claims during his 2022 presidential campaign. Now, while the case was sent back to a lower court, the DP claims the decision was a deliberate attempt to interfere with the presidential election and potentially disqualify Lee. So when asked if he agreed with calls for the Chief Justice to resign, Prime Minister Kim Min-seok responded he was well aware of the issue at hand. But People Power Party leader Chang Dong-hyuk argued the move was just to shield Lee, noting his trials were frozen after his election victory. The PPP also criticized plans for a special tribunal on insurrection, tied to former President Yoon Suk-yeol's failed martial law order in December. The debate has now become a central issue in the broader discussion about the separation of powers.
Right, so that was day 1, and today was day 2, so please tell us about the second day as well.
Right, so today's session zeroed in on foreign affairs, security and defense. And this comes amid ongoing trade negotiations with Washington, as we heard earlier on this newscast with Toyan. And it's therefore no surprise that the trade deal was a big part of the session today, with PPP lawmakers firing questions that targeted the scale of South Korea's pledged investment in the U.S. And here's what one politician said.
The amount South Korea originally agreed to invest in the United States is $350 billion US dollars, 486 trillion won. That's 19.6% of our GDP. Isn't that too much to have agreed to?
To this, the Prime Minister responded that once negotiations are somewhat finalized, Assembly consent may be necessary if it places a financial burden on the public. The issue of South Korean workers detained in Georgia also came under fire, with the PPP arguing that the large-scale arrests targeting only Korean factories by U.S. immigration authorities at a time when tariff negotiations between Seoul and Washington are underway reflect the Lee administration's lack of competence. The DP, on the other hand, countered that the incident stemmed from excessive crackdowns by the U.S. authorities.
The use of chains and ankle shackles during the arrests. This is being condemned as clear mistreatment and an inhumane practice. The U.S., too, must change what needs to be changed and improve what needs to be improved.
So in response to these concerns, Foreign Minister Cho said that this could serve as a blessing in disguise.
The U.S. has now taken the initiative to actively address long-standing visa issues. And since we have also been pressing strongly on this matter, I think it will serve as an opportunity to resolve visa problems more effectively going forward.
So this interpellation session is now halfway through. So, Hae-ryun, what can we expect in the days to come?
That's right. So on Wednesday and Thursday, we can expect the National Assembly to focus its attention on the economy, society, culture, and education. So on Wednesday, key topics are expected to include economic management, public finance, government spending priorities, and responses to current economic challenges, including inflation and jobs. Lawmakers will question ministers about measures to stimulate economic growth, fiscal reforms, and industrial policies, as well as scrutinizing the Yi administration's tariff negotiations and any alleged mismanagement. And on Thursday, the agenda is likely to include education policy reforms, school and teacher issues, protection of cultural assets, social welfare expansion, and the administration's broader plans for building national power.
All right, our National Assembly correspondent Moon Hae-ryun, thank you for your report.
Thank you for having me.
Now, staying at the National Assembly, main opposition People Power Party lawmaker Na Kyung-won was blocked from becoming an opposition bloc vice chairperson of the National Assembly Legislation and Judiciary Committee on Tuesday. Amid the ruling party's push, the committee held a secret ballot rejecting her appointment with 10 votes against. The ruling Democratic Party cited Na's ties to former President Yoon Suk-yeol, who is on trial over his martial law declaration, and her own 2019 parliamentary clash trial, where prosecutors are seeking a 2-year sentence. The PPP boycotted the vote, criticizing the chair's decision to hold a secret ballot instead of following the usual practice of filling the post by mutual agreement. Now, for the first time on the defense front, a U.S. aircraft carrier is reportedly not expected to take part in the Freedom Edge multi-domain exercise between South Korea, the United States, and Japan, which began on Monday. According to Yonhap News Agency, citing an unnamed military official, the absence may be due to scheduling conflicts as U.S. carrier strike groups have recently been deployed to the Middle East. But there is also speculation that Washington may be leaving room to resume dialogue with North Korea, which has repeatedly condemned such trilateral drills. This 5-day exercise marks the third of its kind, following previous drills in June and November of last year. Staying on the defense front, what would it be like for you to return to a country you helped secure in war more than 7 decades later? Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung had a chance to talk to these heroes who were invited by South Korea's Veterans Affairs Ministry, honored for their courage and sacrifice.
Most Koreans are familiar with the Incheon landing, the operation commanded by General Douglas MacArthur to reverse the course of Korean War. Celebrating the 75th anniversary of this amphibious landing operation, the Navy held a ceremony on Monday at Incheon City Port. It is not just Koreans who consider the event meaningful, though. U.S.-Korean War veterans who were once stationed here felt the same way, too. Lois R. Quinn, who treated wounded soldiers aboard the hospital ship USS Haven in 1953 as part of the Navy Nurse Corps, was one of them. The 98-year-old was excited to be back in Korea for the first time in 72 years.
It's exciting, and I was trying to find out. I wanted to see where my ship was positioned for 8 months. We were anchored here for 8 months during the war, and then, like I say, after the armistice, they brought the POWs aboard, and we took the POWs back to the States. And we were due to come back the next year, but other things happened. But I have been keeping up with the South Koreans in California.
Rudy B. McKinn Sr., a former U.S. Marine who participated in the Incheon landing and the Battle of Chosun Reservoir, enjoyed the ceremony at the front row. He shared his story of how he got a Korean national flag from a Korean kid at that time, which is still hanging in his office.
And a little kid comes into the bivouac and says, "Is there anything you'd like for me to pick up for you?" He was looking for cigarettes or canned goods or something, anything we could give him. He was starving to death. So I said, "Yes, I would like a copy of, I would like a Korean flag." And he says, "I can get it for you."
The flag drawn on a rice sack was stained with blood from the Battle of Chosun Reservoir. It was framed the wrong way around, but as it's so fragile and weak, he says he just leaves it as it is. With memories of Korean War shared through veterans, our history lives on through the generations. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Now to the latest on the war between Israel and Hamas. Israel has launched heavy bombardments on Gaza City, leaving dozens dead. The strikes come as both sides remain deadlocked over hostage releases and a possible ceasefire. Park Geon-woo has the latest.
Israeli forces launched a ground assault on Gaza City Monday evening local time, aiming to seize the Hamas stronghold. Al Jazeera reports that at least 48 people were killed and more than 50 were wounded. Israel's defense minister said Gaza is burning in a post on X after heavy overnight strikes on the city. Speaking to reporters on Tuesday, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also suggested the operation was already underway.
The Israelis have begun to take operations there, so we think we have a very short window of time in which a deal could happen.
While Israeli tanks push toward Gaza City, U.S. President Donald Trump warned Hamas on Truth Social to release Israeli hostages still held in Gaza, calling such an act a human atrocity. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu thanked Trump for what he called his unflinching support for Israel's fight against Hamas and efforts to free all captives. The ground push began just hours after Rubio met Netanyahu in Jerusalem. On Monday, both said the only way to end the conflict is to eliminate Hamas and free the remaining 48 hostages, about 20 of them believed alive, rejecting calls for an interim ceasefire.
We sent a message to the terrorists. You can run, but you can't hide, and we'll get you.
As far as the president's been clear on the ongoing issues in Gaza, and that is that every single hostage, both living and deceased, needs to be home immediately.
Meanwhile, Hamas insists it'll release the captives only in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, a lasting ceasefire, and an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza City. Over the past week, Israeli airstrikes have flattened dozens of high-rises that Israel says were used by Hamas, and last Tuesday hit a building in Doha, Qatar, targeting senior Hamas figures. The Israel Defense Forces has urged more than 1 million residents of Gaza City to move south to designated humanitarian areas, saying some 300,000 have already fled. The coming days are likely to see heavier clashes as Israeli forces advance street by street. Park Geon-woo, Arirang News.
Finally, on the cultural front, the original soundtrack for Netflix's animated film, K-pop Demon Hunters, has reached a milestone by simultaneously dominating both the U.S. Billboard Hot 100 and the Billboard 200 album charts. Golden from the OST of the movie retained its #1 spot on Billboard's Hot 100 singles chart for the 5th week, according to a Billboard preview of its main singles chart on Monday. The soundtrack also topped the Billboard 200 albums chart for the first time this week, marking the first time in about 5 years that a K-pop album and one of its tracks have simultaneously topped both charts. BTS achieved this in December 2020 with the album BE and its lead-off track, Life Goes On.
Rain will begin in the central parts of the country from tonight, and it will rain across the country tomorrow. As much as 80 millimeters of heavy rain will be concentrated in the Seoul metropolitan area, inland areas of Gangwon-do province and Jeju Island. Between tonight and early tomorrow morning, heavy rain of around 20 millimeters per hour will fall in the central regions. After rain across the country on Wednesday, the late summer heat will gradually fade. The temperatures will drop further the second half of the week. The daytime temperature in Seoul on Friday will be 22 degrees Celsius, about 3 degrees lower than the average. Tomorrow morning, Seoul will start off at 23 degrees, Busan at 25 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 26 degrees in Seoul and Chuncheon, Daegu and Jeju 32 degrees. Rain will mostly stop tomorrow night, but Gangwon-do province, the Gyeongsang-do provinces, and Jeju Island will continue to have rain until Thursday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
And that is Newscenter for tonight. I'm Song Yu-jin in Seoul. For all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and hope you join us tomorrow as well.